Since 1995, the UN Climate Change Conference, or what is more commonly known as the COP, has gathered the world's countries once a year to discuss, share knowledge, negotiate, and take collective action to spur on a greener future. From the very first COP to the 28th just held in Dubai, Denmark has brought its rich experience with green solutions to the table. And if there's one solution that's particularly emblematic of Denmark's presence at COP, it's the synergy between the decision makers and the solution providers. You're listening to Sound of Green, a podcast from State of Green. Each episode, we invite experts and stakeholders to convey Danish perspectives on a given challenge of the global green transition. Through decades of experience, Denmark has turned many of these challenges into opportunities. By sharing these experiences, we hope to help you do the same. In this episode, we explore the Danish way of doing COP. As you've just heard, this podcast is all about showcasing Danish perspectives on the global green transition by sharing the stories of our experiences. When it comes to the Danish approach to the COP, we at State of Green actually play an integral part in that story ourselves.
My name is Finn Mortensen, and I'm the Executive Director of State of Green. And State of Green is a public-private partnership, not-for-profit. Our job is to promote green Danish solutions to international stakeholders, both political and commercial stakeholders, and to foster relations with them to try and showcase what it is we have achieved in Denmark over the past 50 years and hopefully inspire them to move in their own green transition.
Finn has been with State of Green since the beginning, and that beginning is inextricably linked to the COP.
It all started back in 2009 when Denmark was hosting, it was COP15 at the time. We were tasked with setting up a Danish platform in connection with COP15. We've done that ever since. From the government side, the idea behind State of Green was to serve as a sort of a nation branding organization. From the business side, the idea was to create a common focal point for business interests in connection with COP15, where we could showcase how Denmark's transition had actually taken place and what kind of companies could provide solutions that could inspire others. So that was a backdrop for the creation.
Today, State of Green is an official organizing partner of the Danish Pavilion at COP, Denmark's national showcase platform and meeting point. Each year, we help organize side events all throughout the summit, where public and private actors come together to share knowledge and present solutions. Initially, State of Green was meant to be a temporary platform, but it quickly became evident that there was merit in working to further the green transition in a public-private partnership.
The initial reaction was, yes, that might be a good idea, but how will it work? Actually, the idea was that as an organization, we would close down at the end of Q1 in 2010. But already in around the fall of 2009, it was evident that this was a good idea.
So, when Denmark goes to the COP, both public and private actors come along to advocate for green progress. To understand what that looks like in practice, a true insider perspective might be helpful.
So my name is Maria Samuelson. I'm the head of delegation, as it's called, in the UNFCCC process in the Ministry of Climate and Energy and Utilities. So I am the lead of the Danish negotiations team at the technical level in the negotiations.
Maria has attended the COP since 2017, so she's well versed in all of the facets of COP that may seem like a bit of a black box to outsiders. As she explains, COP activities essentially take place on two separate tracks.
In this context, we often distinguish a little bit between what we say the negotiation track and the action track. The negotiation is kind of the framework for the work that we do. It's where the official agreements and the rules that we have to apply to as party to the UNFCCC, whereas the action track is where all the action is happening, where all the companies come and showcase good business cases, come and demonstrate the solutions to the green transition that we have so many of in a Danish context and are very, very good at showcasing.
In recent years, the showcase of solutions from Denmark's private sector has grown increasingly remarkable. At COP28, over 30 companies comprised the biggest Danish business delegation yet. One of them was Ørsted, Denmark's largest energy company. And for Ørsted, there's no doubt that a strong private sector presence at COP is crucial to the process of fostering green progress globally.
I might be biased, but I think that it's necessary. If you look at energy, which is responsible for 75% of global emissions, largely, and if you look at the investments needed within energy, then around 70% of those investments, they will need to come from the private sector. So you need to get the ones that have the money and the ones that are going to do a lot of the hard work, so to speak, getting the turbines in the water, getting the solar panels out there, making sure that we have the means to do energy efficiency improvements. If you don't have these actors around the table, then it will be very difficult to reach the targets.
This is Emil Damgaard-Gran, the head of global positioning at Ørsted. Emil oversees Ørsted's activities in relation to the COP. And in his experience, the potential for synergies between public and private partners is increasingly being recognized as one of the great assets of the COP.
It's not about one individual, it's not about one country, but it's about everyone being around the table. I definitely see private sector involvement in COPs being more and more integrated. I've experienced that firsthand in Glasgow at COP26 and at Sharm el-Sheikh at COP27. We feel that the governments are inviting us in, and we are also accepting that invitation.
This increased integration shouldn't be taken for granted. COP hasn't always been an arena for cross-sectoral dialogue. As Finn Mortensen can attest to, the public-private partnership exhibited by State of Green at the Danish Pavilion was an anomaly in its first years of existence.
In the beginning, in the first years, I would say it was rather uncommon that we had a platform like the one here where we stood together side by side, the public sector and the private sector. But increasingly over the past 4 or 5 years, I think it has dawned upon many people that the climate challenge is of a magnitude that governments cannot do it alone. The private sector needs to be involved.
Timing may indeed be one of the key reasons why public-private cooperation at COP has gained traction in recent years. The global green transition is at the vital stage where formal ambitions need to be materialized into tangible action. And as Maria Samuelsen explains, that cannot be achieved without creating a link between decision makers and solution providers.
I think with the Paris Agreement, we established the global rules, so to say. And I think from that point on, while it's still important to meet every year and discuss and emphasize the need for raising ambitions, we are also moving into more of an implementation phase. The agreement now has to have life, really, and that's what we all put in it as members or as parties to this agreement. And that's why I think the business side is so important, because that is the life that we put into this agreement. These are the solutions we need to spearhead and increase even more. So that's where I think the business side has an important role to play in this context.
A good example of how public-private collaboration can give life to the implementation of green solutions is the First Movers Coalition. Launched by the American government and the World Economic Forum at COP26, the coalition is a public-private partnership aimed at harnessing the purchasing power and supply chains of companies to create early markets for innovative clean energy technologies that are key for tackling the climate crisis. Ørsted is a founding member of the coalition. And as Emil explains, the engagement of industry leaders in such partnerships sends an important signal to other solution providers and decision makers.
The rationale behind the First Movers Coalition is to show clear demand signals towards producers of some of the newer low-carbon technologies that we need in order to reach net zero. So if we go together across the private sector and send a demand, for instance, by saying by 2030 we will promise to source at least 10% of our concrete or of our steel from low-carbon resources, then we send a clear demand signal to the entrepreneurs, to the startups, to the companies that need to develop these technologies so they can see that there is a market. It's important to show dedication and ambition on behalf of the Danish private sector because that sends a signal to governments, not only within Denmark, but across the world, that we are ready, we are available, we have the solutions. So if you ramp up your ambitions, then we are ready to deliver.
Importantly, the Danish businesses participating in the COP aren't just there to showcase their solutions. They're also advocating for the business practices needed to transform their own industries and the regulatory conditions needed to realize their green visions. For Emil, this sense of purpose makes being part of the Danish COP delegation meaningful.
I work for Ørsted because Ørsted has a vision of a world that runs entirely on green energy. So that means that what I personally think is the right thing to advocate for, that is also 99 out of 100 times what Ørsted would also choose to advocate for. I do feel that the Danish companies participating at COP in general are on the right side of history and have their visions well aligned with what is required for our planet in terms of climate and biodiversity. So I have a good sense of the endeavors of the Danish companies being well aligned with what is also needed for the planet.
The alignment between Danish companies and global green ambitions has been recognized internationally multiple times. For instance, Ørsted has on more than one occasion been named the most sustainable company in the world. And having a proven green track record matters greatly when it comes to fostering mutual trust and respect needed for successful cross-sectoral collaboration.
It's clear that there is a more open door to speak to the right stakeholders because they know that we have the best interests of the planet, and we can really sense that they are also in need of the advice that we can provide on what are the regulatory levers needed to speed up the deployment. Because we are on the forefront of climate change, so to speak. We are out there putting the turbines in the water, installing the solar panels, building the first large-scale e-methanol factory in Europe. So we know what challenges we are facing on an everyday basis.
What the COP essentially provides is a unique opportunity for these real-life experiences of both private and public actors working to realize green ambitions all over the world to be shared face-to-face.
There is just something about being together in a physical place. Then when you really get out there and speak to all the doers and all the thinkers out there and get perspectives that you don't get whether you're sitting in front of your laptop or whether you're sitting somewhere else in Denmark, but you get to meet people from all across the world with different perspectives, having different challenges, and perhaps having worked on some solutions that you haven't thought about before.
This sharing of perspectives in a physical space and across sectors is also something Maria Samuelsen appreciates as a government representative, because it spurs on the creation of a common language and frame of reference for all participating parties.
A few times throughout the weeks, we come for like half an hour and give a status, and we take turns in the negotiations team to come by the State of Green Pavilion and just give a quick briefing. And I think sometimes it feels like coming a bit out of for fresh air from the negotiation rooms. It gives us a different perspective because obviously it's very linked, and we're coming straight from the rooms and obviously often going straight back into the negotiation space. But having to maybe translate a little bit what's actually going on and some of the difficulties in the negotiations can also give us a different perspective, I think.
In Maria's experience, outside perspectives and seeing the bigger picture are absolutely vital to keeping spirits up in the COP negotiations, which are often incredibly complex and tedious. Because despite critical voices questioning whether the COP is really a worthwhile endeavor, it represents an extraordinary exhibit of global action.
I definitely understand sometimes the skeptical voices, and sometimes I can definitely ask myself that question as well, especially if you've been sitting in a negotiation where you feel like you just go in circles and it's the same points being made all over again. But I do think that sometimes when you lift yourself a bit away from that concrete situation and think about the fact that we every year meet at a high political level to discuss climate action and how important it is to keep this fight going and keep raising ambition, that kind of gives you a bit of chills, right? Because this is something that ministers and heads of state meet to discuss every year. We don't have many issues that bring that kind of political attention. But when you then reach that agreement at the end, it really gives a high, because that means that 195 parties or something like that have come around on something and agreed on something which might be able to move things along.
Before the Danish delegation traveled to the COP, we asked Emil and Maria what they were personally hoping to achieve and looking forward to. For Emil and Ørsted, focus was on advocating for better conditions for the very necessary deployment of renewable energy.
In order to have just a tiny chance of keeping temperatures within 1.5 degrees, the world needs to triple the deployment of renewable power capacity by 2030. That is an insane amount of gigawatts of wind power, of solar power needing to be deployed. What we're trying to achieve at COP, that is to shed light on the fact that if you want to reach these very ambitious targets, you need to do more in terms of regulatory frameworks. And there are at least 3 things that we think that governments should be having an increased focus on. One thing is they need to be serious about unlocking the necessary supply chain investments. Secondly, we need to have a framework in place so we can speed up planning and permitting. Currently, it sometimes takes longer to plan and permit an offshore wind farm than it takes to actually construct it. Third, we also want to share the message that everything needs to be electrified. And what can't be electrified, we need to fuel that with green fuels from power to X, from renewable energy sources. So those are the 3 main messages we will be delivering at COP, whether at closed meetings, whether at fancy stages, or whether at roundtables, or in the communication we do around COP.
For Maria, she knew that COP28 was bound to be a critical moment in the efforts to address climate change, because it marked the first so-called global stocktake. The global stocktake is a process for countries and stakeholders to see where they're collectively making progress towards meeting the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement, and just as importantly, where they're not. It's meant looking at everything related to where the world stands on climate action, identifying the gaps, and working together to agree on solution pathways to 2030 and beyond. And as Maria explains, the outcome of this exercise will have important consequences.
It's the culmination of 2 years technical process where inputs have come from science, from parties, from businesses, and now it's time for the political response to that. And I think that will be the most significant decision we're going to be making at this COP, because it will set the tone for the years to come.
So how did it go? We called up Maria and Emil after they returned home to ask them. As for the global stocktake, Maria admitted that the road to the final agreement text wasn't an entirely smooth one. Still, she's proud of the end result.
I think overall, the result of the global stocktake is really, really good. It was tough negotiations, long nights, and a lot of back and forth. We saw a draft text a few days before the end of the COP, which was not very ambitious, and we were very disappointed and a bit nervous that this is what we could achieve. If this was all, then it definitely wouldn't be a satisfactory result. But in the last few days of the COP, a lot of ambitious countries pulled together. And when we saw the final text coming out, I think early morning on Wednesday the 13th, so the day after the COP should have ended, it was definitely better than we could have expected. So many good results, especially on mitigation and the energy transition, where I think we have some very strong language now on what we need to do in order to phase down emissions, really, but phasing out fossil fuels, increasing renewable energy and energy efficiency, a lot of really strong signals there. And I think the fact that we now have, global agreement around the global stocktake on where we are, what we need to do, how to get on track. I think that's really historic in a sense.
After each COP, there's naturally a lot of debate about whether the final agreement is good enough. And with the severe climate challenges and crises we're facing globally, the answer will probably never be a resounding yes. We can and must always do more. Even so, it's important to recognize that part of what makes the COP meaningful is that it's global. And as Maria states, the COP28 agreement reflects the value of global support.
You can always discuss how binding the agreement is, should it have been more ambitious, all of these things. But I think we really managed to step up, and everybody is supporting the outcome that came out of this COP. And I think only in that way we can move something if everyone agrees, right? If we end up with a result that is fragmented and some parties saying, well, we don't want to have anything to do with that, then we won't get anywhere. So in that sense, there was really global support behind it, and I think that's a big plus from this COP.
Emil is also optimistic about the final agreement, especially in regards to the ambitions on renewables that Ørsted has been advocating for.
Overall, I think it was a very productive COP for Ørsted. We had the ambition to help pave the way for the tripling renewables target. I can't claim that it's on us that it became part of the final text, but I do hope that we've been one of the pieces in the puzzle pushing for that. So I'm very happy about that.
Another highlight for Emil was the strong displays of public-private partnership that Ørsted and other Danish representatives put forth during the summit. Ørsted was particularly focused on fostering stronger collaboration on green fuels, and managed to do so with fellow solution providers and decision makers.
I was also very excited from a Danish perspective to see ourselves at Ørsted and Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners and Topsø to go together with the Danish Minister for Climate and Energy and the Crown Prince and others, and speak with a common voice on green fuels, where we held a very successful event. It was good to see the Danish public and private sector together, showing what Denmark has to offer on this area to the rest of the world.
While the fight against climate change holds many uncertainties, it's abundantly clear that strong partnerships between public and private actors are a crucial part of the solution. And the COP offers a unique opportunity for those partnerships to be fostered and exercised. The continuously strong Danish presence at COP is a testament to just that, as Maria Samuelsen states.
I think we are really good at doing that at every COP, really having those side events that demonstrate the cooperation that we can achieve through the public-private cooperation that we have. I think the Danish Pavilion really is a good example of this cooperation, where a strong negotiations team and a strong business team is really the way that we, from the Danish side, kind of demonstrate that we are there and we mean business, and we also have the good solutions.
In a year's time, world leaders will convene once again for another COP in the name of global climate action. And while the formal negotiations and agreements continue to be the focal point of the summit, the public-private platform that Denmark introduced almost 15 years ago has only become more relevant. So, when it comes to the future of the COP, the Danish message is clear.
There are quite some discussions about, the future of the COPs. How do they look like? Are they still this big format with all kinds of stakeholders meeting and getting together, or should we separate the negotiations a bit from the action track? I think, in my personal view, I think it's important to have it together. I think this action track underlines the fact that we are now in a phase where we need to implement the agreement that we've made, and we actually have a lot of solutions out there. And I think separating it from the action track would be kind of separating the work that we do from the real world, really, and what needs to take place for us to move things along.
I'm still convinced that the success of not only the COP, but of overall climate aspirations and targets that depend on both the public and the private sector. The public sector, they need to negotiate the final targets, the countries between them, but we are the ones that can deliver the solutions and the technologies, and we're the ones that can bring them down in cost and scale them. So we need each other, basically.
But the concept of public-private partnership has come to stay, no doubt about that, and it will also be evident in future COPs. I think the notion will spread even further. We can see that from the number of requests we have gotten over the years. We have helped a number of countries with inspiration from Denmark in setting up their own public-private partnerships. So I think the future bodes well for the notion of a public-private partnership.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Sound of Green. We want to give a special thanks to Maria Samuelsen from the Danish Ministry of Climate, Energy and Utilities, to Emil Damgaard Gran from Ørsted, and to our very own Finn Mortensen from State of Green. For more stories and solutions from the Danish green transition, visit our website, stateofgreen.com. Here, you can dive deeper into Denmark's approach to creating a sustainable society and connect with the solution providers that make it possible.